So I think my honourable friend raises a point of fundamental importance. But the hope that we may all take, the reassurance that those of us who have faith may be certain of, is that the highest authority is unquestionably immortal, invisible, and only wise, and even outside the control of the House of Commons.
And I always thought the Templars were too powerful, and that's why the power was taken away. Let us go to the SNP spokesperson, Tommy Shepherd.
It's been 5 days since the Prime Minister announced an England-wide lockdown and a major U-turn regarding the furlough scheme. And all week we have been trying to clarify whether furlough support will be in place just when England is locked down, or whether it will also be available beyond December the 2nd if devolved administrations are required to take similar action. On Monday, the Prime Minister suggested it would be available to devolved national governments, only to have a series of ministers deny this as the week progressed. It is bizarre that such a simple question still does not have a clear answer. Can the leader confirm whether the Chancellor's statement which will follow will clear up this ambiguity? And in either event, can we have a debate on how to improve the capacity of devolved administrations to deal with the COVID pandemic and prepare for recovery, including their relationship with the UK Treasury? Now, following the rather in which the lockdown in England was leaked last weekend, the government has much to learn about how it communicates. Can I raise a specific matter of how it communicates with members of Parliament? There's an increasing tendency for ministers to provide online briefings to members, and this is welcome. But often the notice of such briefings is insufficient to allow members to participate. Can he ensure in future that the government ministers improve their communication with members, including using parliamentary private secretaries to reach out to their opposition counterparts regarding them? And finally, Mr. Speaker, can I return again to the question of remote voting? The latest changes to proxy voting are welcome and can only have come about because the government accepts the logic of not requiring members to physically queue up to vote. So if that is the case, why not complete the circle and simply switch the remote voting system back on? That way, MPs can exercise their own discretion on behalf of their constituents rather than have to delegate their vote to others.
Can I just say, I do apologise that no picture was put up of the SNP spokesperson when the line's gone down. The sound quality is good, but you're just a blank at the moment. But I will ask the Leader of the House to respond. Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, it is a great pity that we could not see the honourable gentleman's cheerful countenance, cheering us all up and bringing sweetness and light to this chamber, which he does on a weekly basis. The point he raises on the furlough scheme has been responded to by the Prime Minister any number of times with considerable clarity that it is a UK-wide scheme, and that is how it is operating, has operated. It continued until the 31st of October and was then renewed. It remains a UK-wide scheme, and that's as it should be. And I have pointed out to the honourable gentleman before, but it bears repetition, that the UK taxpayer has provided £7.2 billion of funding to Scotland. It has saved 779,500 jobs under the furlough scheme, in addition to £770 million for the self-employment scheme. So the United Kingdom, as a single entity, has protected the interests of Scotland and will continue to do so. With regard to communication, I think the honourable gentleman is advocating a counsel of perfection. Of course it's important to try to give notice, but it's also important to try and ensure that briefings are provided quickly, and getting that balance right is something the government strives to do. I think by and large, honourable and right honourable members appreciate the opportunity to have briefings, and that we should not delay briefings because of the risk of some people missing the relevant notification. As regards voting in person, people need to be here. They need to be here to speak in debates. They need to be here for the legislative procedures, and people are still free to go through the division lobbies. They only have the opportunity to use a proxy if that is what they choose to do. We are a party that believes in choice, Mr. Speaker, liberty and freedom.
Right, let us head to Nigel Mills in Amber Valley. Nigel Mills.
The Leader of the House may have seen the sad news this morning that hundreds of Argos stores will close, including the one in Alfreton in my constituency. A terrible blow for the employees and for the high street. Could he find time for a debate on how we can reinvigorate our high streets once this COVID crisis is over?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I had indeed heard that sad news, and it is a real problem, and high streets are facing enormous challenges, mainly from developments that were taking place before the coronavirus, but exacerbated and made faster because of the coronavirus. The government has, of course, got the £3.6 billion Towns Fund that is helping high streets, and I think there is more work to be done on that. As regards a debate, I think this is a question for the Backbench Business Committee.
Let's head up to Gateshead to the chair of the Backbench Business Committee, Ian Mearns. Ian Mearns.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, and of course the member for Amber Valley is a member of the Backbench Business Committee too, so he'd be asking himself for a debate. Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement and for announcing the Backbench Business for next Thursday. The first debate would be on a motion on the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on refugee communities, the lead member for which is my honourable friend, the member for Bethnal Green in Bow, and the second debate would be on achieving the ambition for a smoke-free England in 2030 in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and public health reorganisation, and the lead member for which is my honourable friend, the member for Durham City. Mr. Speaker, the Home Office had a huge backlog of cases in processing applications by refugees and asylum seekers prior to the pandemic. And the Home Office have now contacted my office asking my staff if they would accept verbal updates on individual cases, as they don't have the capacity to do it in writing, is what they're saying, which would mean that we would then have to take note of what is being said and then relate that to the constituents concerned, which is most unsatisfactory, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the system was a mess before the pandemic, and it is a mess that is getting worse, leaving constituents completely in a void. Can we have a statement from the Home Secretary about what is happening in the Home Office and its immigration management system?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for the work he does as chairman of the Backbench Committee and for bringing forward important debates that have support across the House. The point he mentions is clearly not one that members must feel under any obligation to go along with, that we expect responses from departments to be proper responses, and it is not for us to take notes of conversations and pass them on, because that is likely to lead to misunderstanding, error and imprecision. I will certainly take this up with the Home Office afterwards, but I would make a general point that the government has been absolutely clear in all its guidance that you should work from home if you can do your job. If there are people in any sector who cannot do their job at home and are therefore failing to answer MPs' correspondence because they're all working remotely, they ought in fact be going into work. That is what the guidance says.
Robert Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over 50 years, the Mottram bypass has been endlessly promised, delayed, cancelled, argued over and consulted upon. I'm delighted that this government have finally committed to build the bypass, but today yet another formal and legally required consultation has been launched. After that is completed, there has to be a development consent order, a process that lasts a minimum of a further 17 months. So can we have a debate on the process around how we build key infrastructure projects and how we can make that more efficient and faster? The people of Glossop and Hadfield have waited long enough.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes such a powerful point. It is deeply unsatisfactory that it has taken 50 years to deal with this issue and that there will be further delays. The government does have plans to improve the planning system and to speed up infrastructure projects. And let's hope he doesn't find any newts, because they are often an absolute nuisance when it comes to building projects. A nuisance, I might even say, Mr. Speaker. But I will pass on his comments to my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, who will be answering questions in a month's time, on the 3rd of December.
Let's head up to Greater Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new government guidance on care home visits requires them to take place outside, at a window, or with a floor-to-ceiling perspex screen separating people. Now, for many of the cases I've had raised with me, this isn't a solution, as their loved ones have dementia or are bedbound, or the care home lacks the resources to make the adaptations required. I would like to apply for an adjournment debate to raise these cases with the relevant minister, but because I am participating virtually, I cannot do so, although the chamber is already set up for virtual participation. And as we know, adjournment debates are primarily for the honourable member and the minister. Will the Leader of the House consider changing the standing order so that members can apply for and lead an adjournment debate virtually and enable them to do their jobs?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is proving that she can do her job by raising this important issue, and that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has made regular statements where he can be questioned. Adjournment debates do allow other members, honourable members, to intervene, and the honourable gentleman, the member for Strangford, who is sitting in his usual place regularly, intervenes very helpfully in adjournment debates, and I think it is important that the debates within this House are with people physically here, but the Honourable Lady has proved that she can raise her point in these interrogative sessions.
We're now heading to Harrow East with Bob Blackman. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you quite rightly have held the government to account for releasing statements to the media before they're announced to this House. So I was outraged that last weekend, when the funding deal to bail out Transport for London was negotiated and embargoed until Monday, I was horrified that the Mayor of London broke this embargo and released a press release on Sunday setting out actually details which were incorrect in that press release. So could we have a statement from the Secretary of State for Transport to the House on exactly the terms of the bailout for Transport for London, so that we MPs can hold the Secretary of State to account and make sure that the record is set straight on what the deal is?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the record is something we must set very straight, and that is that the Mayor for London is incompetent and he's run Transport for London hopelessly, and that is what you get when you have socialists in government. The London Transport Network has been run very poorly, and its finances are in a bad state because of a political refusal to increase any ticket fees over 4 years. And anyone who thinks that TfL is any good would just need to look at Hammersmith Bridge, which remains unrepaired, inconveniencing tens of thousands of people and causing great inconvenience without Transport for London managing to lift a finger and saying, I think they're going to do 7 feet a month or something. It's going to take them so long to do it. And Crossrail continues to be delayed. It is an extraordinary record of failure. And it's a record of failure that should be put straight, and we should have a Conservative mayor next year, and then it will be broad, sunlit uplands.
Let's head up to Kingston upon Hull with Dame Diana Johnson. Dame Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hull Trains, the open access provider of direct rail services between East Yorkshire and London for the past 20 years, today ceases its services in this second lockdown. Open access has been one of the most successful aspects of the 1990s rail industry reforms, and the Transport Secretary claims to be as keen as mustard on open access. So, given the government's support to the rail industry and Transport for London, I am perplexed as to why Hull Trains has not been given the relatively modest government support beyond just the furlough scheme that would secure their future post-COVID. So can we please have a statement about how we can assure a post-COVID recovery for all rail operators, including open access?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point. I mean, the government has taken huge steps to support as many industries as possible, whilst recognising that not everything can be supported. But I will certainly take up her point with the Secretary of State, because, as she rightly says, open access has been one of the real advantages of railway privatisation.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the University of Oxford is regularly rated the finest in the world, may we have a statement from the government ensuring that what passes for statistical analysis by SAGE should in future be checked and confirmed by the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine before it is inflicted on our sceptical and suffering constituents.
Well, Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I fear I ought to declare an interest because some years ago I was at that university, as I thought the honourable gentleman might have been too, though he is a much greater scholar than I am, if I may place that firmly on the record. It is only right that all statistics provided by the government and by its advisers are challenged. That's one of the reasons for this place's existence and for the ability to hold the government to account. And I'm sure that the right honourable gentleman will use the resources that are available to him to challenge all statistics. We remember what Disraeli supposedly said about statistics when discussing this matter, don't we, Mr. Speaker?
Dave Dugan.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Many Angus constituents have contacted me concerned that Scotland's high teaching standards will be diluted as a result of the UK Internal Market Bill. The potential of creating a UK-wide view of teaching standards, as this bill is currently set out, seeks to do, and it risks imposing lower standards in Scotland that threaten the very fabric of Scotland's separate and independent education system, which, as the leader will know, was provided for in the 1707 Act of Union. Teachers regularly come and teach in Scotland from other jurisdictions and are highly valued, but in every case, the professional standards and requirements of the General Teaching Council for Scotland must be met. So can we have a debate in government time regarding the need to protect the Scottish education system from the UK Internal Market Bill?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman knows that the UK Internal Markets Bill devolves a great deal of power. I think 70 powers are devolved from that were with Europe and are now coming back to the United Kingdom onto the devolved authorities. I fear that if we were to have a debate on standards in Scottish education, it would be why the SNP has been running them into the ground in its period of running the Scottish Government, because the record of the SNP is absolutely appalling, as the honourable gentleman present know only too well. The Scotland, as the honourable gentleman rightly says, used to have one of the best records, and it is the SNP who has undermined that whilst they've been in government.
Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back on Boxing Day 2015, my constituency was terribly affected by flooding. And since that time, the same homes and streets have repeatedly suffered from flooding, something which once again reared its ugly head earlier this week. It's bad enough that the same people are repeatedly flooded, but the trauma for those people is worse. Every time it rains heavily, fearing the worst is a torture which is hard to imagine. So can my right honourable friend therefore ask the Secretary of State for DEFRA to come to the House to make a statement to let my constituents know when he will implement the flood prevention measures for my constituency as proposed by the Environment Agency?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the difficulties families face when they are flooded and the worry that they must have when the rain beats down again is something with which every member of this House would have sympathy. A great deal of money is being spent, of taxpayers' money is being spent, and Yorkshire is receiving more than any other region. 496 million has been spent since 2015, protecting 66,000 properties. And across England as a whole, 2.6 billion is being spent on flood and coastal defences between 2015 and 2021. And in March, there was a commitment to 5.2 billion to build 2,000 new flood and coastal defence schemes across England by 2027. Now, I appreciate that doesn't necessarily give my honourable friend's constituents the comfort that they desire, but he will have the opportunity to raise it with the Secretary of State on the 26th of November, but I will also take it up on his behalf and try and get him a detailed answer on when the programme will actually start.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Home Secretary ended the exemption in relation to the numbers of people who can take part in a protest, meaning that for the duration of lockdown, the maximum number of people who will be able to demonstrate is now 2. Why did the Leader of the House allow that to happen without her coming to this House to explain why Why was there not a statement as to why this most egregious and draconian restriction on our liberties was going to be necessary?
Into the House.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself came and made a statement, and the Prime Minister himself opened the debate yesterday on these new regulations and is senior to the Home Secretary. So it was done at the most high level, and a large number of restrictions are being imposed which nobody wishes to impose. Nobody wishes to restrict the freedoms of the British people. It is being done and has the support of the opposition benches in response to the coronavirus crisis. So I think that is the answer, that it was the person to whom the Home Secretary reports who came to make the statement. And as the Queen is not allowed to come into this House, there is no more senior authority who could have come.
Richard Hull.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Despite the various national restrictions, can the Leader of the House confirm to us that this House, and indeed the other place, will continue operating, whatever the situation, so that Parliament can continue to hold the government to account for the decisions being made during this global coronavirus pandemic?
Leader of the House.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I actually think this follows on from the question from the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Orkney and Shetland, because this House is ensuring that the government is held to account when other means of doing it have been curtailed. So people can't protest, but we can be here, and we must be here, because if we are not here, then how are we going to check that the rules are being introduced, are debated, are considered, that anomalies within them are sought out, that people make representations about people in care homes or complain about the limitation of protest, that we must be here. It is our duty to be here. We have a legislative programme to get through. We have to ensure that that happens, but we have to hold the government to account and seek redress of grievance. It is our historic duty, and we do it in this chamber, we do it in Westminster Hall, we do it in committees, and that must carry on.
Bill Estes.
Concerns have been raised about the accuracy and efficiency of some of the new tests being used to raise testing capacity. Mass testing is essential if we are to control the virus, and the Liverpool mass testing pilot must be a success. So can we have a debate so we can scrutinise the effectiveness and the accuracy of the new tests being proposed?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, there will be a debate next week on Wednesday the 11th on COVID, a general debate where it would be right to raise this issue. Testing is increasing enormously and has now reached 500,000, and 9.6 million people have been tested at least once. But it's obviously right that these tests have to be accurate, otherwise they serve no useful purpose, and therefore to question that is a reasonable thing to do, but is something, of course, that is being done within the process anyway to ensure that it is a reliable and robust process. But there will be an opportunity to debate it on Wednesday.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Leader of the House will be as disappointed as I am that services of remembrance in Warrington and across the UK won't be happening this year because of the restrictions that we introduced yesterday. Those restrictions also mean that poppy sellers, many themselves veterans, won't be able to stand on the streets and raise funds for the Royal British Legion. I wonder if he'll join with me in encouraging everyone to log online to the Royal British Legion's website and download a poppy and donate so that the work of the Royal British Legion can continue to support both veterans and their families.
The House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend should tell his local authority that they can organise a remembrance service, provided that it is outside and that social distance can be maintained. And I would encourage him to have a word with Warrington Council and ask them to crack on with it, because there isn't a lot of time left. Poppy sellers are such a wonderful part of the fabric of our nation. They are such a varied group of people who have such a commitment to remembering those who gave their lives to ensure that we could live in freedom. And therefore, my honourable friend is right to say that people should go to the website and donate that way if they can't do what they would usually do and allow some coins, or preferably notes, to clink, their notes obviously don't clink, into a poppy collector's tin. Though it's not a tin, is it? It's a plastic container. But, Mr. Speaker, I think everyone in this House knows what I mean.
Well recovered. We now go up to Scotland with Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While foster care is a devolved matter, employment law isn't. And foster carers don't set their own working hours or rates of pay, cannot subcontract their work. They're highly supervised with regular performance reviews and training, and they're limited to working exclusively for one local authority or an agency at a time. It's clearly employment in all bar name. So can we therefore have a debate in government time to address their lack of employment status?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises a point that has been considered and debated, and I think even has been taken to a tribunal. It is obviously a matter he feels strongly about, and I think in the first instance a letter to you asking for adjournment debate may well be in order.
Dave Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, there are many vulnerable young people within Don Valley who are likely to fall victim to county-line drug gangs. Usually, grassroots sports clubs are a fantastic way to keep children off the streets whilst also ensuring they are fit and healthy. As a result of the renewed lockdown, however, this will no longer be the case. As a firm believer that the devil makes work for idle hands, will my right honourable friend inform the House whether the government will allow grassroots sports clubs to reopen as soon as possible so children can remain on the right path, keep healthy and achieve their goals?
The House.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this, and the devastation that drugs cause is very shocking and saddening, both to individual lives and to communities, and that keeping young people active is important. Now, it is true that people may have limitless outdoor activity and recreation as long as it takes place alone with a household or one other person socially distanced. Children under school age may join with a parent or a carer or a nanny even when seeing one other child of under school age with one other person, and they are allowed then to exercise. I appreciate this is not fully the answer that my honourable friend would want, so let me suggest telmatopodesis is something that children may enjoy, a word provided to me by the Times.
Steve McCabe.
Mr. Speaker, fertility treatment on the NHS is subject to age restrictions and people are losing out because of coronavirus delays. I asked in a parliamentary question 30 days ago if the department would stop the clock. They're not ready to respond yet, but more people are losing out while we wait. I wonder if the Leader of the House could arrange a clear answer, a statement, or perhaps even a leak, so that we don't unnecessarily create another group of COVID victims.
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, it is always important that departments respond punctually to letters and queries raised by members of this House. And I've said a number of times from this dispatch box that if members are not receiving replies, my office will do everything it can to facilitate a swift reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As an ex-coal miner, I am very proud of my mining roots in Ashfield and believe we should do everything we can to remind ourselves of our industrial past. I am currently working with ex-Silver Hill colliery miner Alan Batterham and Craig Gould at Mate Consorting to get the old headstock wheels renovated and sited around the old colliery. Would my right honourable friend agree to a debate on our industrial heritage, and will he say a big thank you to Alan Batterham, Craig Gould and all the ex-Silver Hill colliery miners for working on this project?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman knows my weakness, that debating our heritage is something that I'm always tempted to agree to, but I think the Chief Whip might think I'd gone slightly rogue if I did this in the midst of a session. But I would like to thank Alan Batterham and Craig Gould and recognise Ashfield as an important area for both our industrial and cultural heritage. Silver Hill Colliery, which sits above Ashfield, is now a monument to Britain's industrial revolution and mining past. On top of this hill stands an evocative statue of a miner testing for gas, commemorating the miners of Nottinghamshire who worked the coalfields for nearly 200 years. My honourable friend makes the right tribute, and I sympathise with him because mining plays an important role in my own constituency's history and heritage. The town of Radstock boasting a long mining history with a wonderful local museum. So although I know many members would enjoy a debate, I don't think I can promise it in government time, but I think the Backbench Business Committee, with a bit of luck, would look favourably upon a request.
And this Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Leader of the House think it reasonable that name-day questions asked of ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care 6 weeks ago are not answered, even where the department clearly has the information sought, or that letters written to that department in May are replied to by civil servants, not ministers, in October, and at least one case, after 5 months, the answer is to refer it to another department? We know that department is under particular stress, but this is an abuse of the rights of members. Will the Leader of the House interrogate his colleagues and try to get response rates better than that?
In the House.
Although it's the 5th of November, I think interrogation may be a little beyond the powers currently given to the Lord President of the Council. However, what the Honourable Gentleman says is of the utmost seriousness. Named day questions must be answered within the named day period. I had a great deal of sympathy with particularly the Department of Health and Social Care early in the pandemic. But we are now in November. Questions should be coming in a timely fashion. I would say to any honourable and right honourable member who receives a letter from officials, send it back. That is what I have been doing when I get letters from officials. We are not answerable to by officials. We are answerable to by ministers. And every minister knows that. And absolutely, in April, May and June, this was forgivable. In November, it is just not a proper treatment of the rights of members. I will do whatever I can, short of an interrogation, which, as I say, I think the Tower of London may be closed under current circumstances.
Andrew Bowen.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure my right honourable friend will be fully aware of the perilous state of the UK inbound tourist industry, which is losing circa £557 million a week due to the drop in international visitors to the United Kingdom. My right honourable friend has been to my constituency, albeit briefly last year, to see Her Majesty at Balmoral, and so is aware of the importance of tourism because to my constituency, because it has some of the most visited locations in Scotland. So will he consider debate in government time on the importance of this industry to Scotland, and will he consider commending to his colleagues in government the fantastic report published by UK Inbound this week on how we might support this very important industry to vast areas of our country?
In the House.
Mr. Speaker, the tourism industry is indeed fundamental to our national economy. And I had 2 trips to Aberdeenshire last year. The first one was campaigning for my right honourable friend, the member for Uxbridge, to become leader of the Conservative Party. And the second one was, as my honourable friend quite rightly says, for a Privy Council to be holden at Her Majesty's Castle of Balmoral, which was a very interesting occasion about which, fortunately, I'm sworn to secrecy under the Privy Council's oath. But my honourable friend will be pleased to know that the government is supporting our tourism industry throughout the pandemic with a range of measures, including £10 million worth of grants to small businesses in the tourism sector, as well as £50 million delivered this autumn to support infrastructure projects, which will boost visitor numbers and help access to tourist destinations as we recover. But it is a fundamentally important industry, and it has to be said that Aberdeenshire is an extraordinarily beautiful part of our United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, all of us from across the House will appreciate the importance of children being back at school learning, especially those from more disadvantaged or poorer sections of our community, since it is they who would otherwise be most detrimentally impacted and fall further behind. However, despite ministerial statements stating that transmission in schools is very low, hundreds of individuals in my Slough constituency have contacted me or signed a petition to request that they be given the right, if they so wish, to withdraw their children from school in the midst of a pandemic. So given that I have thus far not been able to acquire that data, would the Leader of the House please arrange to furnish me with constituency-wise data so that I can forward that to my constituents to help allay their concerns?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes such an important point when he says that education is of greatest importance to those from the most deprived backgrounds, and is why it's so fundamental that schools remain open. And the figures on transmission by children seem to be extraordinarily good. There was a report in the newspaper only yesterday. I am not in a position to promise him constituency-level data. I don't know that they exist. But I will certainly look into this because I think it is important to reassure parents that it's not only important for their children to go to school, but it is also safe. And I'm very grateful to him for his question.
David Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent months, I've had quite a number of constituents contact me because they've been waiting significant periods of time for responses from agencies like the DVLA and in particular the probate office. And these delays are attributed to COVID, and we understand the challenges that provides. But emails and calls are going unanswered for weeks and months, and it's very distressing for my constituents. So can we have a debate on how these agencies can maintain an acceptable standard of service in this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is of fundamental importance that our constituents can have access to the government services they need, particularly during a pandemic. Government agencies, as I mentioned earlier, are covered by the work from home, if possible, instruction and ought to be continuing with their routine work. And if they can't do it from home, they ought to be going into work to do it. There are some areas where this is not possible because of social distancing. For example, driving tests are problematic. But the service delivery by government agencies ought to be continuing in most cases. I can't promise him a debate in government time, but he has raised the issue, and if there are any specific agencies he wants me to follow up with, I'll be more than happy to do so.
Let's head down to Cardiff with Kevin Brennan. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House expressed enthusiasm for our heritage, as well as being the anniversary of the gunpowder plot. Of course, yesterday was the anniversary of the Newport Rising, which took place in 1839, when 22 protesters were shot dead by troops because they were campaigning simply for the right to vote. With the current spectacle of mobs being organized by the so-called leader of the free world to try and stop votes being counted in the United States, would this be a timely moment for us to debate the history of the struggle for people to achieve the vote and to look at how we can protect our democracy from this kind of toxic politics in the future?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be a great pleasure to debate the way that the glorious American Constitution grew out of our wonderful Constitution, and how you have two of the most beautifully formed constitutions in the world, two really beautiful constitutions that work enormously effectively and protect democracy that has worked effectively both in their country and in ours. And all I can say, Mr. Speaker, is God bless America, but the United Kingdom first.
Teresa Villiers.
Mr. Speaker, can I follow up on the question by the member for Amber Valley on help for local high streets? I think we do need a debate about this. The Leader of the House talked about the Towns Fund, which is doing great work, but it doesn't cover every local high street. So we need some form of perhaps a return to the grants available in the first lockdown, because there are small businesses on our local high streets that were just getting back on their feet before this lockdown and now are hit once again. We do need time in this House to debate the future of our local high streets.
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, there is a great deal of discussion on local high streets. It is just worth reiterating what the government has done in terms of economic support that has helped both large and small businesses. It adds up to about £200 billion, 40 billion on the furlough scheme, 9.6 million jobs, many of which will have been high street jobs. 3 million self-employed individuals have been supported to a value of over £13.5 billion. £21 billion from SME and large business coronavirus business interruption loans. £40 billion via over 1.3 million bounce-back loans, 11 billion in business grants and 10 billion in business rates relief, which will particularly have helped smaller businesses, 27 billion in VAT deferrals, again helping high streets, and nearly 500,000 businesses, and nearly 33 billion at the summer economic update. This is really, really important support. It is helping high streets, it is helping businesses across the country, and the Towns Fund on top of that will help high streets be rejuvenated once the pandemic has ended.
Let's head up to Scotland with Douglas Chapman. Douglas Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and thank you for the Leader of the House for that previous answer. But SME owner-directors and freelancers are a constituency of voters that the Conservative government have tried to attract in the past. Yet these are the very people being let down and excluded from the Chancellor's support measures. Now is not the time to leave hard-working people behind or those with get up and go, leave them excluded from support. So this is a matter of grave concern for this House, and it's a matter of grave concern for our constituents. So will the Leader of the House agree to a debate in the government time on this crucial issue as a matter of urgency?
The House.
Mr. Speaker, I agree that it is crucial, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be making a statement and answering questions immediately after me.
We now head to Wellingborough with Peter Bone.
Last weekend, the details of the national lockdown were leaked to the media. And instead of the Prime Minister being able to announce it first in the Commons, it was announced in newspapers. I know the Prime Minister was furious about this and has started a leak inquiry. Could we have a statement next week about how the leak inquiry is progressing, who is in charge of it, and whether the mobile phones of the people at the meetings have been checked? Or is this leak inquiry like the one in Westminster, where there's no intention of finding out who actually leaked it?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, this is a leak inquiry that wants to find out what happened. I know that the Prime Minister was far from gruntled over what happened last week. He had intended that the announcement should come to the House first. It needs to be looked into thoroughly, but I would say there is something deeply distasteful about this culture of leaking, and we want this House to hear first. We want a proper process, and that is what was intended, and it then came to the House and we had a vote yesterday. And I would say that is also important, that the commitment to have votes on important issues of national significance has been maintained, and therefore the rights of the House are being protected.
And I did ask for the House to be updated as well. Right, let us move to Wales with Jessica Morden. Jessica Morden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Please can we have an update on when the government will respond to the review on access to benefits for the terminally ill? I know the Minister at DWP has been receptive to the issues raised by the Motor Neurone Disease Association, Marie Curie and others, but we do need to see action to change this unfair system as soon as possible.
Mr. Speaker, it is an important issue which the House will have every sympathy with. I will take it up with the Department and get an answer to the Honourable Lady.
Let us head to Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met a Harlow beauty salon owner in real distress because of the devastation of her business due to COVID, even with the government grants. Small businesses in Harlow, like beauty salons and gyms, are really struggling because of the coronavirus lockdown. And despite being COVID secure, particularly with gyms, they're not allowed to open yet, yet estate agents are. Whilst they're reluctantly accepting a new need for the lockdown because of the rise in COVID, can we just have an urgent statement to address these anomalies and do everything possible to ensure that these small businesses in Harlow survive and thrive?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly understand the frustration of my honourable friend and the disappointment for all business owners affected by the reimposition of restrictions. I'd like to quote the Prime Minister himself, who said that I'm truly sorry for the anguish these measures will impose, particularly for businesses that had just got back on their feet, businesses across the country that have gone to such trouble to make themselves COVID secure, to install perspex screens and to do the right thing. No one wants to impose these kinds of measures, but we cannot ignore the evidence in front of us of rising hospitalisations from COVID, which is why these decisions have been taken. They are decisive but temporary, and they should reduce the spread of the virus. The government will continue to do everything possible to support jobs and livelihoods for the next 4 weeks. Can I thank the people in his constituency and across the country who run beauty salons and gyms and other outlets that are being closed for their perseverance in the face of adversity.
Chris Elmore.
Mr. Speaker, can I raise with the Leader the access to pension credit and the fact that more than 1 million older people who are entitled to pension credit don't take it up for very many different reasons? It would lift 400,000 pensioners out of poverty, meaning that we'd have the lowest levels of pensioner poverty in this country ever. So can I ask if he could request that DWP ministers make a statement on how they intend to advertise pension credit take-up, or indeed grant a debate on access to pension credit so that pensioners can get the credit that they are allowed and deserve and should feel no shame in taking up?
In the House.
Mr. Speaker, the government always makes efforts to ensure that people have access to the benefits to which they are entitled. They are there for people to claim and not to be hidden away. I would say we all have a role in this. We have a role as constituency MPs to highlight to pensioners who get in touch with us and facing difficulties, or to use our newspaper columns that most of us have to remind people of what is available. And I must confess the Honourable Gentleman has in fact given me the topic for my next article for the Somerset Guardian, because I think, particularly in winter, it is really important to emphasise to people that there is help available and it is there for them. It is not anything to be ashamed about.
Chris Loader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Shadow Leader of the House for mentioning my private member's bill a little earlier. I'd just like to re-emphasise, if I may, to the Leader of the House that it is a bill of great importance to me. However, as we have gone through second reading, we are at committee stage, and therefore this lockdown shouldn't delay this bill unless there are further restrictions at the government's behest. So I hope that the committee stage can continue, and hope the Leader would support that. And may I just briefly say as well, yesterday for many of us in this House was one of the most difficult votes that we have had to take. I'm very grateful to the Leader of the House for extending the debate that we had to 3 hours, but I hope if there are further such debates on such matters of national significance, we might be afforded a longer debate still. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, is it indiscreet of me to say that it was your lobbying that got the debate extended to 3 hours? If it is indiscreet, it's too late now, but thank you very much. It is always important that proper time is provided, and it is one of the great difficulties of organising government business when there are so many pressures for time, including for his important private member's bill, which I think is popular across the House.
Can I just say to the Leader of the House, early on the morning of the 30th of October, just past 2020, Cuban authorities in the city of Santiago de Cuba demolished an Assemblies of God church. The pastor of the church, Pastor Palamo Cabrera, was taken away by government authorities, and it was reported that he had been put under pressure to sign a document which would say that the church demolition was legal. According to Christian Solidarity Worldwide, this church has been in the crosshairs of the Cuban government since 2015. Its arbitrary destruction is a serious violation of freedom of religion and belief, and will the Leader of the House agree to a statement or a debate in this matter? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the UK remains deeply concerned about the severity and scale of violations and abuses of freedom of religion or belief in many parts of the world. We are committed to defending these freedoms for all and promoting respect between different religious and non-religious communities. Once again, I would like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Strangford. He is one of the House's most diligent campaigners for the rights of Christians suffering persecution around the world. The government regularly communicates with the Cuban government about a range of human rights issues, both in London and Havana, and also addresses these issues through multilateral human rights forums, including the UN Periodic Review. While we welcome the new protections that underpin freedom of religion or belief in the 2019 Constitution, we call on the Cuban authorities to confer in practice those rights that the Constitution enshrines. As regards a debate, I think an adjournment debate or a backbench business debate would be very suitable. We did have a debate in government time earlier in the year.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many gyms, fitness spaces and leisure centres in Redcar and Cleveland have gone above and beyond to become COVID secure and prevent the transmission of the virus. We know the benefits of exercise in terms of both mental and physical health, but in winter it is difficult for many to exercise outside in the dark, cold and wet. So can we have a statement from the government on the importance of indoor exercise facilities in society, and will the Leader confirm that the government will not keep gyms closed beyond the 2nd of December? This is a public health emergency and gyms are essential to public health.
The House.
Yes, I always caveat this, Mr. Speaker, by saying as long as I don't have to do it myself. I gave up exercise as a schoolboy and always tried to avoid it even then. But I absolutely accept my honourable friend's point that exercise is very important for some people's mental health and obviously in terms of dealing with obesity and things like that. So endless outdoor activity is allowed, but he's right to say the weather is not obviously as nice as it was in the first lockdown, but it has to be taking place alone with a household or one other person socially distanced. It is obviously the plan that these restrictions end on the 2nd of December. That is what was voted for yesterday, and at that point things will reopen.
We now go up to Scotland with Alan Brown. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got a constituent whose savings are invested in buy-to-let mortgages and flatted properties. Now, the block height is less than 18 metres, so post-Grenfell regulations and clad inspection and local authority certification does not apply. But despite this, surveyors are actually zero value in the properties. Lawyers won't handle sales, and replacement mortgages are therefore impossible, and these properties in this specific height range are currently worthless. So can I get a government statement on how they're going to address this specific issue?
Leader of the House.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the issue of cladding and the effect that's had on people trying to sell properties has been a problematic one. The government has been spending a great deal of taxpayers' money to remove unsafe cladding on the bigger buildings, but I accept that there are ones of a lower height where the problem may not always have been addressed or may not be in a programme to be addressed. What I think it would be best if I did was to take this up with the relevant Secretary of State and get a fuller answer to the honourable gentleman.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, and suspend the House for 3 minutes. Order. Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Right Honourable Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Prime Minister set out the action we need to take between now and the start of December to control the spread of coronavirus. In response, we're providing significant extra support to protect jobs and livelihoods in every region and nation of the United Kingdom. An extension to the coronavirus job retention scheme. More generous support to the self-employed and paying that support more quickly. Cash grants of up to £3,000 per month for businesses which are closed, worth over £1 billion every month. £1.6 billion for English councils to support their local economy and local healthcare response. Longer to apply for our loan schemes and the Future Fund. The chance to top up bounce-back loans and an extension to the mortgage payment holidays. All on top of more than £200 billion of fiscal support since March. This statement follows the Bank of England's monetary policy decisions earlier today, meaning all economic and monetary institutions are playing their part. As you would expect, the Governor and I are in constant communication as the situation evolves. Our responses are carefully designed to complement each other and provide certainty and support to people and businesses across the UK. The bank's forecast this morning show economic activity is supported by our substantial fiscal and monetary policy action. And the IMF just last week described the UK's economic plan as aggressive, unprecedented, successful in holding down unemployment and business failures, and one of the best examples of coordinated action globally. Mr. Speaker, our highest priority remains the same: to protect jobs and livelihoods. That's why we've already decided to extend the job retention scheme to December. But people and businesses will want to know what comes next, how long we plan to keep the scheme open, and on what terms. They want certainty. The government's intention is for the new health restrictions to remain only until the start of December. But as we saw from the first lockdown, the economic effects are much longer lasting for businesses and areas than the duration of any restrictions. And as the Bank of England have said this morning, the economic recovery has slowed, and the economic risks are skewed to the downside. Given this significant uncertainty, a worsening economic backdrop, and the need to give people and businesses security through the winter, I believe it is right to go further. So we can announce today that the furlough scheme will not be extended for 1 month. It will be extended until the end of March. The government will continue to help pay people's wages up to 80% of the normal amount. All employers will have to pay for hours not worked is the cost of employer NICs and pension contributions. We'll review the policy in January to decide whether economic circumstances are improving enough to ask employers to contribute more. Of course, as the furlough itself is now being extended to the end of March, the original purpose of the job retention bonus to incentivise employers to keep people in work until the end of January obviously falls away. Instead, we will redeploy a retention incentive at the appropriate time. And for self-employed people, I can confirm the next income support grant, which covers the period November to January, will now increase to 80% of average profits, up to £7,500. Mr. Speaker, I also want to reassure the people of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The furlough scheme was designed and delivered by the Government of the United Kingdom on behalf of all the people of the United Kingdom, wherever they live. That has been the case since March, it is the case now, and will remain the case until next March. It is a demonstration of the strength of the Union. And an undeniable truth of this crisis: we have only been able to provide this level of economic support because we are a united kingdom. And I can announce today that the upfront guaranteed funding for the devolved administrations is increasing from £14 billion to £16 billion. This Treasury is, has been, and will always be the Treasury for the whole of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, I know that people watching at home will have been frustrated by the changes the government has brought in during the past few weeks. I have had to make rapid adjustments to our economic plans as the spread of the virus has accelerated. So I'd like to take this opportunity to explain how and why this has happened. During the summer, as we began slowly unlocking, it was our hope the country would continue to be economically open, albeit with local restrictions being put in place as and when needed. We knew there would likely be a resurgence in the spread of the virus, but with increased NHS capacity and test and trace, our belief was we would be able to stay ahead of the virus. On this basis, we designed an economic approach which continued providing wage support to people, incentivised businesses to retain staff beyond the end of the furlough scheme, and created new job creation and training schemes such as Kickstart, all built to support an economy that was broadly open but operating with restrictions and overall lower demand. At the time, this approach was not government acting alone. Our proposals secured wide-ranging support from the TUC to the CBI. It was their hope, as it was ours, that the public health situation would allow us to keep businesses and workplaces open. The virus, however, continued to spread. Localised restrictions were having an impact, and so we intensified this approach and added further areas. As these restrictions intensified, the economic impact, particularly on industries such as the hospitality sector, was significant. So, in response, we altered our approach to wage support, making it much more generous to employers and, in turn, protecting jobs. We also introduced a range of grants to businesses, whether open or closed, to help them meet their fixed costs, and additional funding for local authorities to respond to specific local economic challenges. But again, the virus continued to spread, but more quickly. And so we arrive at last week, when the government's scientific and medical advisors presented data which showed that R is greater than 1 in all parts of the country, that the NHS was at risk of being overwhelmed in a matter of weeks, and the likely resultant loss of life that would accompany such an event. The only viable solution left to protect our NHS was the reimposition of temporary, significant enhanced restrictions in England, in addition to those in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. And so, given these changed public health restrictions and the economic trauma they would cause in job losses and business closures, I felt it best to extend the furlough scheme rather than transition at that precise moment to the new job support scheme. Now, political opponents have chosen to attack the government for trying to keep the economy functioning and to make sure the support we provide encourages people to keep working. And they will now, no doubt, criticise the government on the basis we have had to change our approach. But to anyone in the real world, that's just the thing you have to do when the circumstances change. We all hope for the best, but make sure we plan for any eventuality. We can reintroduce the furlough now only because we kept the system on which it is based operational, because there was always the possibility that we would be back in this situation. I'll leave it to the people of this country to decide whether they believe the government is trying its best to support people through an unprecedented crisis, to decide whether it is a good or bad thing to alter our economic plans as the health restrictions we face change. What I know is that the support we are providing will protect millions of jobs. What I know is that it is never wrong to convey confidence in this country and our economy through our words and action. And what I know is today's announcement will give people and businesses up and down our country immense comfort over what will be a difficult winter. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor and Lee Stoltz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Businesses and workers have been pleading for certainty from this government, but the Chancellor keeps ignoring them until the last possible moment after jobs have been lost and businesses have gone bust. The national lockdown was announced on Saturday, many weeks after both SAGE and Labour called for a circuit breaker. The Chancellor ridiculed those proposals for a shorter, more effective circuit breaker as a blunt instrument. Just a moment ago, he argued that it was only last week when the government's scientific and medical advisers presented data showing the NHS was at risk of being overwhelmed. SAGE presented that evidence, Mr. Speaker, on the 21st of September. So I'll give him the chance now to correct the record and state that actually the government knew about that evidence many weeks ago rather than last week. He can intervene on me if he wishes to correct the record. No, he hasn't done that. That delay in implementing those measures, we know, has cost livelihoods and lives. Now, when the lockdown was announced, the Prime Minister said furlough would be extended for a month, 5 hours before that scheme was due to end. 2 days later, realising the self-employed had been forgotten, there was a last-minute change to the self-employed scheme. And now, further changes. The Chancellor's fourth version of his winter economy plan in just 6 weeks. The Chancellor can change his mind at the last minute, Mr. Speaker, but businesses can't. We need a Chancellor who's in front of the problems we face, not one who's always a step behind. Hospitality workers in the north, until last Saturday, had to plan on the basis that they would receive 2/3 of their previous income. 2/3, not for so many 80%, or indeed 93%, I think it was the Prime Minister said, but 80% for huge numbers of them because of this government's failure to fix flaws in the social security system. The Chancellor said no to those hospitality workers, only to accept their demands today. The First Minister of Wales, ahead of announcing a firebreak, made workable requests that could have offered support for Welsh workers. Again, the Chancellor said no, only to U-turn now. Labour argued that Scotland should have access to the furlough scheme, should there need to be a national lockdown north of the border. Once again, the Chancellor said no. Then the Prime Minister, of course, said yes. Cue another undignified scramble to accept that demand today. How many jobs could have been saved if this government had recognised reality and let businesses plan for the future? Will the Chancellor apologise to those who've already been made redundant because of this last-minute approach? Now, earlier this week, I called on the Chancellor to use the moment of the national lockdown to set out a proper plan for the next 6 months. Finally, today, he's indicated that furlough will remain for lockdown areas until March, as Labour called for. And of course that's welcome, but many other questions remain. When will the Chancellor deliver any information about that retention incentive after Labour's been warning for months that it was poorly targeted? By the time we get to March, it'll be a whole year since the first economic support package, but there's still nothing in the Chancellor's remarks for those people who've been excluded from government schemes until now. What does the Chancellor say to those groups? Will we be facing another scramble before the end of March? Can he guarantee we'll avoid such uncertainty then, dependent, of course, on the health circumstances? Other countries seem to be able to plan for the future. Why can't this one? What's the future of the phantom funding formula, providing a seemingly arbitrary £20 a head to local areas under tiered restrictions for business support? How long will that support last? What happens when it runs out? When will he fix social security so it stops penalising the self-employed, homeowners and huge numbers of other workers facing hardship because of problems that could be fixed quickly? What is his government doing to rectify the problems with the £500 self-isolation payment so that they actually receive it, workers receive it when they need it and aren't pushed into debt for doing the right thing? And above all, when will his government enable all local areas to deliver the test, trace and isolate system when we know this is more effective than the enormously expensive national outsourced system. The Chancellor needs to stop blaming our NHS, as he appeared to do a moment ago, when it's his government that's still blocking local areas in lower tiers from delivering a more effective service. Our economy is struggling more, Mr Speaker, I'm finishing now, much more than many other countries, because this government simply won't acknowledge that until it gets a grip on the health crisis, it won't be able to deal with our economic crisis. Confidence is indeed key, and that's what this government needs to start delivering. Thank you.
Can I just say to people, we don't have interventions in statements. So if you're wondering why the Chancellor didn't, it's because we don't. No problem at all. I'm just trying to be helpful. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. And to address them in turn, Mr Speaker, I think the claim that our action was too late is, in the words of the government's own medical advisers, a misapprehension, because there is no perfect moment at which to enact measures which have far-reaching and damaging consequences for the people and businesses of our country. And we should only enact such measures, Mr Speaker, when it becomes truly unavoidable. Mr Speaker, it is also entirely false of the party opposite to claim that if we only did what they suggested, things would somehow be different. This is because the party opposite couldn't actually explain what their position was. At first, it was a circuit breaker for 2 weeks. Then it was an intervention that might last longer. I think we heard yesterday 3 weeks. And then it might be something that would need to be reimposed again and again and again. That, Mr Speaker, is not a plan that would support the businesses and people of this country. The Honourable Lady asked about the NHS. We have provided the NHS with tens of billions of pounds to make sure that they can do the very valuable job that they are doing, and they will have our full support over this difficult winter period. She asked about support for local authorities. We have provided just over £1 billion to give local authorities the ability to support their local businesses and economies through the winter period, on top of the direct support that those closed businesses will receive. And she asked about supporting local track and trace efforts, and I agree that is important, and that is why we have provided, on a transparent funding formula, almost up to £500 million to local authorities to so ensure that they can carry out enforcement, compliance and local contact tracing at the level that they need. But, Mr Speaker, the honourable member opposite called for a 6-month plan. But yet she and her party have not put forward a 6-month plan of their own. But, Mr Speaker, I understand why. Because they actually know, as most members of this House know, that most people and businesses in this country know, that we are dealing with a once-in-a-century event. Because they know, as most members of this House know, and people and businesses up and down the country know, that in the face of such an unprecedented crisis, the government must be flexible to ever-changing circumstances. It is not a weakness, Mr Speaker, to be agile and fast-moving in the face of a crisis, but rather a strength, and that will not change.
We now go down to Central Devon to the Chair of the Select Committee. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I just agree with my right honourable friend that taking an iterative approach to these problems as circumstances change is indeed a strength rather than a weakness. But could I just focus for a moment on the lockdown itself? And as my right honourable friend will know, the minutes of the SAGE meeting held on the 21st of September stated, and I quote, "Policymakers will need to consider the analysis of economic impacts and the associated harms alongside this epidemiological assessment. This work is underway under the auspices of the Chief Economist." As my right honourable friend knows, I wrote to him asking that the analysis referred to in these minutes should be provided prior to the vote on lockdown that was held in the House yesterday. This would have helped to have informed that debate. The reply I received did not provide the information requested. So could my right honourable friend confirm that the SAGE minutes are accurate when they state that the Treasury has worked on this analysis under the auspices of its Chief Economist? And if they are accurate, would my right honourable friend confirm that the Treasury will now release this analysis without delay?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he will know that I replied to him and his committee with the answers to his question, that there does not exist a specific prediction or forecast, which I think is what he is asking. But what we did provide, and I'd say the economic evidence that we considered, was the context for the lockdown being imposed and the impact that the initial lockdown has already had, so one could make their own assumptions about what would happen thereafter. He will know as well as I know the OBR are one of our preeminent forecasters, and what they are forecasting already is that the economy falls by about 10% this year, that unemployment reaches 12%, an increase of 2.5 million people, and that in the medium term our economy will suffer scarring of about 3%, which represents tens of billions of pounds of less economic output, and indeed he will of course also know the impact this is having on our public finances. That is the situation as it exists today before we enter the new set of restrictions. Obviously that will cause additional stress on all the numbers that I outlined for him. He will also have seen the Bank of England's comments this morning that the duration of further restrictions will increase their impact of long-term scarring on the economy.
Video link. Alison Thulis.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to read out the comments I made on Tuesday, or indeed any of the contributions I've made in the last 6 months, because it feels like I've been arguing for exactly the same things for the UK government all this time. And the reality is that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the north of England have been dinghied by this Chancellor until he was forced to lock down in England. Now, I'm glad that furlough and the self-employment support scheme has been extended to March, but we should be clear that this kind of support is not unique to the UK, and countries of all sizes have been supporting their people, and many of them have done it more competently and more generously than the UK. Can he confirm that the furlough scheme is not tied to any particular tier and it will be available to all who need it at 80%? And would he refrain from cutting it back to 60% as before, because that cost many businesses and many employees dearly? Many businesses are as good as closed, especially in hospitality and tourism, travel, events and culture, and they need ongoing support. I return to the issue of the excluded from the support schemes, and it's disgraceful and it's unacceptable that there is still nothing in this statement for them after 8 months. Can the Chancellor tell me why he is still choosing to ignore 3 million people across these islands? Many sectors of the economy in which they work are not going back to normal anytime soon. I spoke to Scottish hospitality reps this morning, and they are deeply worried about the winter months ahead. They're increasingly indebted, and 70 to 100,000 jobs are at risk. It would help them immensely if the VAT cuts that the Chancellor had previously announced could be made permanent. I welcome the additional £2 billion for Scotland, because Scotland's been able to provide hospitality businesses with rates relief, but we need clarity on the future longer-term funding to plan ahead. A growing number of businesses cannot afford to pay for redundancies should they go bust. So what provision is the Chancellor making for supporting those who may yet lose their jobs as businesses go to the wall? Will he extend the £20 uprating of universal credit into the year ahead as well? Will he expand it to legacy benefits, because those in legacy benefits are really struggling? Will he enhance statutory sick pay, and will he listen to Maternity Action and Pregnant Then Screwed on their demands for women to be kept safe and their incomes protected? This has been a complete buruk, but it doesn't need to be. Will the Chancellor work with all parties and with the devolved institutions, and at the very least, could he give the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in Scotland, Kate Forbes, the courtesy of a phone call?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm glad the Honourable Lady welcomed the extension of job support through to next year. And with regards to Scotland, I think it's clear that even the First Minister has conceded that this generous support currently available in Scotland is only possible and affordable because we have a Treasury that represents the whole of the United Kingdom. I can confirm that, of course, the CGRS is a UK-wide scheme, and we will continue to apply the furlough to each part of the UK equally, treating every citizen, no matter which region of the nation they live in, the same. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady also asked some specific questions. I'm happy to provide her with the answers. Scotland will receive an upfront guarantee today worth £8 billion. That's an increase of £1 billion on the previously agreed upfront guarantee. And it's that funding, Mr. Speaker, for the Scottish Government to use as they see fit. So the Honourable Lady asked many questions about supporting businesses and people. It is, of course, up to the Scottish Government to make those choices to what to do with our extra £1 billion, and we will look forward to hearing what they do plan to do with that additional funding. And it's also worth bearing in mind, as we hear from the Honourable Lady about the future Scottish budget, that the Scottish Government has the ability to raise taxes. The Scottish Government has the ability to raise the funds it needs to fund the various projects that they would like to. And if these things are important, then of course the Scottish Government will be able to make those decisions on behalf of their people and be held accountable for those.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for demonstrating the strength of the Union and showing that with the best will in the world, the Scottish Government would not have the ability to have the resources to protect Scottish jobs in this way. But is it not now more important than ever that across the whole of the United Kingdom we stimulate wealth creation, creating new goods and services using the natural creativity and innovation of all the people of the United Kingdom, and can we look forward to my right honourable friend using his considerable energy to bring forward proposals in this area based on sound, financially prudent Conservative principles?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend, and I absolutely agree, and he knows better than most the power of the Union and has seen it demonstrated countless times over the years of his service. And he is also right about the power of free enterprise to drive our recovery, and I can give him every reassurance that those sound free enterprise principles will be at the heart of everything that we do and ensure that we have a swift and generous recovery that will benefit citizens wherever they live.
Video link. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's U-turn on furlough comes after intense lobbying by the TUC, the CBI, Labour and leaders in the Liverpool City region. Can the Chancellor explain why workers in the North were expected to get by on 67% of their pre-crisis wages when Tier 3 restrictions were put in place, but that has now changed to 80% once areas in the south of the country are being locked down? And will he give a cast iron guarantee to the people in Wirral West that workers in the North will never again be treated as second-class citizens?
Mr. Speaker, it's simply not the case that the wage support schemes we've put in place differentiate between people on the basis of where they live. All the schemes, whether it's the furlough scheme or the job support scheme, treat people equally wherever they live in every region or nation of the UK. To suggest otherwise is simply wrong and, quite frankly, a misrepresentation of what the Honourable Lady knows to be the case. I would also say to her, she mentioned the TUC. The TUC welcomed the introduction of the job support scheme, and I'm grateful to their help in designing it.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week, the IMF singled out for praise the UK's response to economic response to the coronavirus, citing the timeliness, the speed of response, the generosity and the flexibility of the approach. And I quote, the Director General said, "We welcome the continuing efforts of the government to refine its support measures." Does my right honourable friend also agree to the second part of what the IMF said last week, that over the medium to long term we do need to put the UK public finances back on a sustainable footing?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and she will of course know this well from her own experience. And we welcome the independent scrutiny of institutions like the IMF. They are helpful in providing accountability for the government in its economic response, and I'm delighted they were so positive about what we have done. But she is also right that they said correctly that over the medium term we must restore public finances to a sustainable position. Now is the time to provide fiscal support through a very weak period, but we want to build resilience for future crises, so when the next one of these comes along, we can respond in the same strong and generous way that we have been able to this time.
Video link. Alex Davis-Jones.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to see the Chancellor finally in his place today, but for constituents of mine in Pontypridd and for everyone across Wales, his words are a case of it's too little and too late. I'm aware that the UK Government has confirmed that devolved administrations will receive Barnett consequentials in respect of new funding. However, I know from experience that people in Wales cannot and should not rely on yet another promise from this UK Government. The Chancellor will also be aware that this is not the first time that funding has been promised to the people in Pontypridd. I would like to take this opportunity to remind him of the devastating flooding that decimated communities across Rhondda and Taff earlier this year, and it would be most irresponsible of this government and utterly unfair for people in Wales if they are left behind once again. This government has already blocked the Welsh Government from using both the coronavirus job retention scheme and the job support scheme, and businesses in Wales are suffering now. So will the Chancellor therefore finally commit to fair funding for people in Wales, and will he agree to meet with me and fellow MPs who represent Rhondda and Taff to allow our constituents the best possible chance as we move through the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that I'm glad that over 10,000 of her constituents have had their jobs supported by the furlough scheme that the UK Government has provided. And I'm also glad to say that the Welsh Government will now have received £5 billion in upfront funding guarantees for Barnet, £600 million more and as a result of announcements today. And I'm sure she can talk to the Welsh Government about how they plan to use that money to support her constituents.
Rick Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement this morning, measures that will protect jobs and livelihoods both through this lockdown and give businesses, as they plan for 2021 and beyond, real hope and confidence that there are better days ahead. And with that in mind, does my right honourable friend agree with me and the Bank of England, whose forecasts this morning have shown economic activity in the UK is being supported by our substantial fiscal and monetary policy action, and their assessment that the extended coronavirus job retention scheme will mitigate significantly the impact of weaker economic activity in the labour market?
I thank my honourable friend for the question, and he's absolutely right. It's important for monetary and fiscal policy to be coordinated well, as he said, and I'm glad that we are achieving that. And it's also good to see the Bank of England recognising what the IMF and the Office for Budget Responsibility have also highlighted, is that our interventions in the labour market, our furlough scheme and others have succeeded in suppressing the rise of unemployment, and that will remain our single overriding goal, to keep people in work.
Video link. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Chancellor told us in a statement that people and businesses want to know what comes next, how long we plan to keep the scheme open and on what terms. They want certainty. They certainly do. And that is why businesses and individuals in my constituency of Edinburgh West and across this country are so tired of this constant chop and change. So will the Chancellor today admit that what he has to do is extend furlough through to the summer, to June of 2021, and give those businesses the certainty they need to plan?
Well, Mr Speaker, we've provided that certainty through to the end of spring, at the same time as also saying that we will review the scheme in January to make sure that it's operating well, and at that point review the employer contribution. Combined with all the other interventions we've made, I think that does provide the medium-term certainty that businesses need to plan through the winter and beyond.
Catherine Fletcher.
Yeah. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pretty awed, to be honest, by just the incredible scale of the support that this government is putting in place for the people of South Ribble and beyond. We've got a massive recovery to undertake, where those jobs and employment, it's absolutely vital. There is £2 billion being invested in Kickstart, creating opportunities for people leaving education. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that prioritising help for these people, young workers, such as those leaving Runshaw College in Leyland, is the right thing to do and a key part of how we're going to recover?
Yeah. My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is young people that are most impacted economically by the crisis we're experiencing, and she's absolutely right that they should be at the heart of our thinking about the recovery. The Kickstart scheme is at the centre of that, providing fully funded job placements for at-risk young people. Tens of thousands are starting their jobs in the coming days and weeks, and we look forward to those young people having a new springboard to a bright career in her constituency and elsewhere.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for what he has said today? the equality for all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, whether you're in Edinburgh or Cardiff or London or Belfast, you're treated equally, and that's good news. Can I just ask, in relation to the Northern Ireland Assembly, who's been in a circuit breaker for the last 2 weeks, that the help will be, as the Chancellor said, right through until March, but should it go beyond that, it's very important to have that in place. And could the Chancellor state what support will be given to businesses? A specific question here that have recently been set up but have been excluded from the financial support schemes and are under extreme pressure for their very survival. It's good to hear that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been treated equally, but it's also good to have something for those small companies I've just set up. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that all our job schemes work on a UK-wide basis, treating everyone equally wherever they live, and that will continue always to be the case. I'm also pleased to confirm today an increase in the upfront funding guarantee for Barnet Consequential to Northern Ireland, bringing the total to £2.8 billion, a £400 million increase today, and I'm sure the Northern Ireland Executive can use that funding to support businesses in the way that the Honourable Member describes.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for the support that we have received? In Aberconwy, 8,800 jobs have been protected through the Job Retention Scheme. Across Wales, 82,000 self-employed people have also been supported. Indeed, across Scotland, Northern Ireland and the whole of Wales, there has been unprecedented levels of support through schemes, through Barnet Consequentials and more throughout this pandemic. So could my right honourable friend just confirm again that this House stands for the whole of the United Kingdom, that it's our shared markets and economy, strong economy, that makes this level of support possible, and that all parts of our union will continue to receive the attention and support of our government?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend put it incredibly well. This has been a crisis that has engulfed our entire United Kingdom, and we will get through it together as one United Kingdom, and this government will continue to support businesses and people wherever they live.
Video link. Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Whilst I'm disappointed that there was no mention of those who have been excluded so far, I welcome much of what the Chancellor has said, particularly in relation to the devolved nations. However, when I asked just 2 weeks ago for greater flexibility for the Welsh Government to support jobs during its firebreak, that support was not forthcoming. Greater Manchester and other parts of the north of England received a similar response. So could I ask the Chancellor if he and the government realise that pitting areas of the UK against each other only serves to damage the integrity of the United Kingdom, and I urge him to recognise the need for equity across the Union.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is equity across the Union. I thank the honourable gentleman for welcoming the measures, but there is equity because everyone is treated exactly the same under these nationwide schemes. With regard to support in Wales, as I said, £600 million more announced today for the Welsh Government, bringing the total up to £5 billion of funding. And again, I'm sure the Welsh Government can use that money in the way that he suggests to support businesses if that's indeed what they want to do.
Jonathan Gallas.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I also add my name to the long list of people who are thanking my honourable friends' unprecedented support once again, which will be a great source of comfort to the residents of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torque. And may I raise the fact there is a financial incentive, not just through the Kickstart scheme for the under-25s, but now a financial incentive for the over-25s when it comes to apprenticeships, which will be a huge boost to the jobs and economic recovery of Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And so will he agree with me that this type of scheme is exactly the way forward and that employers should be taking it up to ensure that we can reskill and retrain what is, in Stoke-on-Trent, sadly, a workforce that is largely low-skilled and therefore stuck in some cases, low-wage jobs?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. For, I think, almost the first time, there is now a cash incentive for businesses to take older apprentices on, given the particular nature of this crisis we face. I'm glad that that will help train and reskill people in his constituency. I hope many of them find their way to the world-beating ceramics industry that he champions so well, who I know will also be heartened by the extension of the furlough scheme today.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's right, the strength of our union comes when we are working together. And yet the reality in the delay in announcing the extended support for Wales means that jobs were lost when all the Welsh Government were doing was following the evidence. The Chancellor said it was a strength to act in an agile and fast-moving way. That's exactly what they were doing. And he also described in his own statement, his own words, that extended restrictions were the only viable option. So will he now do the right thing in the interests of the Union, in the interest of fairness, in the interest of equity, and backdate the extended support to the 23rd of October and allow those who lost their jobs potentially to be rehired and then furloughed?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments. What I can tell him is the new CJRS date for eligibility will be the 30th of October, which means that those who are notified to HMRC at any point up to that time will be eligible to be furloughed under the new scheme. And indeed, those that were let go before the announcement of the plans in September can also be rehired and put back on the scheme. The details of that are in the guidance, which will be published imminently.
Video link. Peter Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend on behalf of the 1,900 self-employed people of Darlington who have benefited from the self-employed income scheme and who will welcome his announcement today. But can I urge him to ensure that this money gets out of the door as quickly as possible, particularly with Christmas just around the corner?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can give my honourable friend that assurance. Those are 3-month grants for the self-employed. The system will open in November so that grants can be paid in December in time for Christmas, as he says. And as he knows, that builds on our significant support for the self-employed. Over 3 million people eligible for that support, which is now worth over £14 billion. Today's announcement will mean an additional £7 billion of support to those people over the Christmas period.
Video link. Hannah Bardell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My constituent Douglas McCarthy has been running a bespoke travel business, Travel Yard, for many years and has seen his livelihood completely evaporate. Despite the fact he's been bringing folk home and providing a vital service in the community, he feels that his industry has been virtually ignored by the UK government and the insurance sector, who are failing to pay out on his business interruption insurance. In addition to the uncertainty over UK government support, my constituent has had to fulfil full refunds out of his own pocket with very little support. So will the Chancellor or someone from his team meet with my constituent and I to hear the specific concerns and what can be done to support him and travel agents like him?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, travel agents, businesses coming under the retail category will benefit from business grants in England, and that money has been barneted to Scotland, and so the Scottish Government can choose to do something similar to support their travel agents. And my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, has previously worked with the insurance industry and the FCA to provide clarified and updated guidance for business interruption insurance.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Will the Chancellor now admit that his premature wind down of furlough, which he had scheduled to finish last weekend in the middle of what many people expected to be a second wave, was actually a mistake? Will he admit that the virus doesn't conform to Treasury models or the Chancellor's own timetable for it to disappear? And will he continue to show flexibility, and will he just confirm, for the avoidance of doubt, that if the current lockdown ends on the 2nd of December, that the furlough scheme will be still available to all across the country, whatever tier of restrictions they are put back in?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can give the Honourable Lady that assurance. The CJRS has been extended to the end of March for all people in the United Kingdom, not dependent on the tiers. We will review in January whether it is appropriate at that point to ask employers to start making a contribution as the economy recovers, but we will make that decision in January.
Video link. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Chancellor for coming to the House again to update us on the current situation and to congratulate him on the enormous amount of help that's been given to the British people throughout this pandemic. But could the Chancellor tell us how the country is going to pay for that support?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend asks an excellent question. In the short term, we are paying for this through extensive borrowing, and he will see that this year our debt to GDP will rise to roughly 100%. We are also carrying a significant ongoing borrowing requirement that is evident in the forecasts that have been seen. Now, that is not a sustainable situation. So as we continue to recover and grow, we will have to make sure that we reduce our structural deficit over time in line with the recommendations from the IMF to stabilise that. In the first instance, that will come through growth, but also we need to make sure that our public finances are balanced appropriately, ensuring that we can pass a strong economy on to the next generation.
Video link. Caroline Lucas. Caroline, we can't hear you. Caroline.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Sorry. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in reply to a question I asked the Chancellor back in September, he said those excluded from the self-employed scheme earned more than £50,000 and were in the top 5% of all earners. I would like him to admit today that that is not a fair picture of those who've been left out. Millions have been excluded who are not and have never been in the top 5% of all earners. So will he explain why he has deliberately left out so many people again when announcing this latest version of the self-employed scheme? And will he today finally commit to delivering justice for the self-employed?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady talks about justice. We have spent over £14 billion to protect and support the self-employed, or over 3 million have been eligible for support. That is more substantial, comprehensive and generous than essentially any other country anywhere in the world. And today we've announced that support is being increased in generosity and lasting longer, an additional £7 billion potentially being paid out in December. And I stand by what I said. One of the criteria for qualifying for the self-employment grant was that earnings were less than £50,000. Because we have less information about the self-employed, it was right to target that support on those who need it most. And of the people who are majority self-employed, those earning under £50,000 represent 95% of all of those people, and the average incomes of those over that £50,000 limit is about £200,000. So I think that is a reasonable and fair way to make sure we help the most needy in our society.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I commend the Chancellor on his statement. The incredible £200 billion worth of support this government has already provided has protected thousands of jobs in Blackpool South, and I know those businesses will warmly welcome the extension of the furlough scheme through to March. However, the reliance upon coastal communities such as my own on tourism in the years ahead will present particular challenges. So will he meet with me and my colleague in Blackpool North to discuss those, to make sure we can continue to keep this government's core ambition of levelling up on track in coastal communities?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for his local area and his local small businesses, and I know how important tourism and hospitality is to his local economy. He will know that I am also a champion of that industry, and I'd be delighted to meet with him and other colleagues.
Video link. Yvette Cooper.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Only a week ago, the government told West Yorkshire to go into Tier 3. And only a week ago, pubs and bar staff in my constituency were told their jobs were being completely stopped. Same for them as under national lockdown. But when we asked the government to give them the full furlough scheme because their jobs were being stopped, the Chancellor said no. And the facts show when the jobs being stopped by COVID restrictions were just in the north.
Engineers Week. And as the former engineering envoy, I'm very keen to see our vital engineering sector to continue to thrive and prosper. Can he therefore tell the House what steps are being taken to ensure that the engineering sector have full access to and participate in the excellent Kickstart scheme to bring on the talent of the future?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for the engineering sector, and I know it's an area that he cares deeply about and has spoken to me about in the past. He's right. It's important that we train the engineers of tomorrow, and what better time than Engineers Week. I'd be happy to talk to him and other organisations that he would want to connect me with to make sure that that sector is fully benefiting from the opportunities we are providing for those companies to take on bright new people and provide them with a better future.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is a simple question to the Chancellor. Why does the Chancellor dress up on social media that the financial support, which as he stated today, is being given equally and fairly wherever they live, that the Welsh should be grateful for what is equally and fairly theirs to receive?
Mr Speaker, I think this is, as I said before, this is a United Kingdom approach. We have universal schemes that benefit people equally wherever they live. But on top of that, for those things that we do solely in England that are devolved, that extra funding, hundreds of millions of pounds I announced today, 5 billion in total for the Welsh Government, can be used as they wish to support their constituents. And indeed, I look forward to seeing how they plan to spend that money.
Dr. Kieran Mallon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My constituents understand the enormous challenges the government faces and that we cannot save every single job. But does my right honourable friend share my pride that the IMF has said that our response to COVID is one of the best examples of coordinated action globally, and they specifically praised our response for, and I quote, holding down unemployment?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. At the heart of our approach throughout this crisis has been to protect people's livelihoods. We have strived at every turn to make sure people can stay and work, that their incomes are supported. And as we go through this crisis, I can reassure every member of this House and the country that that remains my overriding priority, and we will throw absolutely everything we can at it.
Finally, Andrew Bowie.
Very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Unlike some of the more churlish comments from colleagues north of the border, can I thank my right honourable friend for listening and acting and demonstrating yet again, as it has throughout this entire crisis, that this UK government, this one nation Conservative government, acts for and supports people around this country, no matter in what region or nation they reside.
Well, Mr Speaker, a fitting place to end, I think, Mr Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is a demonstration of the strength of the Union, an undeniable truth of this crisis, that we have been able to provide this level of economic support because we are one United Kingdom.
I'd like to thank the Chancellor for his statement today in responding to 38 questions in just over 1 hour. Thank you very much. We're now suspending for 3 minutes. Order! Everybody happy? Order. Order. We now come to a statement by the Minister of State for the Home Department on UK terrorism threat level, and I call James Brokenshire to make the statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement regarding the UK terrorism threat level. The UK faces a serious and enduring threat from terrorism. Recent events in France and Vienna have provided a stark and brutal reminder of the risks that we face and the continuing need to be resolute in the face of those who would wish to sow division and hatred. This government is committed to tackling terrorism in all its forms and supporting our friends, partners and allies against those who would do us harm. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of France and Austria at this time of hurt and pain. Our thoughts are with the bereaved and all those who mourn the loss of loved ones. We have made formal offers of support to their governments and underlined our shared resolve to stand together in solidarity against the extremists who despise our liberal values and our very way of life. Since March 2017, UK police and security services have foiled 27 plots, including 8 motivated by right-wing ideologies. The threat level system is designed to give a broad indication of the likelihood of a terrorist attack. It is used as a tool by security practitioners working across different sectors and is used by the police to determine the level of their overall protective security activity. It's also an important way of keeping the public informed about the threat from terrorism and to provide the context to understand why security measures are in place. The Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, is responsible for setting the threat level to the UK from terrorism. JTAC operates independently of ministers and keeps the threat level under constant review. It is based on the latest intelligence from our world-leading intelligence agencies and from our allies around the globe and considers factors including capability, intent and timescale. JTAC took the decision on Tuesday to change the UK threat level from international terrorism from substantial, meaning an attack is likely, to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. JTAC keeps this threat level under review based on the very latest intelligence and taking into account international events. The recent terrorist attacks in France and Monday night's attack in Vienna suggest that the temperature of the threat in Europe is rising. I should stress that this change in the threat level is a precautionary measure and is not based on any specific threat. However, there is a risk that the recent attacks in France and Austria could have a galvanizing effect in other parts of Europe, including the UK, and the change of threat level is therefore seen as prudent. We know these incidents can be exploited by those who want to further their own cause, especially on online platforms. I'm pleased to note that communities from across the UK stand together in uniformly condemning the attacks in Vienna and France. In particular, they stress that places of worship should never be targets for violence and that religion should not be used to justify murder. The national terrorism threat level takes account of the threat from all forms of terrorism, including, but not only, from Islamist and right-wing terrorism and Northern Ireland-related terrorism in Great Britain. A separate threat level for Northern Ireland-related terrorism in Northern Ireland is set by the security service MI5 and remains at severe. When JTAC's assessment of the threat changes, it's important that it is communicated as quickly as possible to ensure that those who rely on it to inform their decision-making and planning can do so. Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu has confirmed that the police have activated their established planning mechanisms following the change in threat level, and the public will see additional police officers being deployed to certain places over the coming days. Our counter-terrorism strategy, Contest, sets out how this government will confront all forms of terrorism. It aims to reduce the risk to the UK and its citizens and interests overseas from terrorism, so that our people can go about their lives freely and with confidence. Already, the government has taken steps to ensure that CT policing and the security service have the necessary tools and powers to keep us all safe from the threat from terrorism. In response to the horrific Fishmongers Hall and Streatham attacks, the government acted swiftly by passing emergency legislation, the Terrorist Offenders Restriction of Early Release Act 2020, to end the automatic release of terrorism and terrorism-connected offenders. The Counter-Terrorism and Sentencing Bill is currently being debated by Parliament. It improves protections for the public by strengthening every stage in the process of dealing with terrorist offenders. I would also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the police, security and emergency services, who show such resilience, courage and professionalism when responding to terrorist incidents, both in the immediate aftermath and the investigations that follow. They put themselves in harm's way to protect us, and we should never forget their service in keeping us all safe. Their skill and dedication is why we are constantly investing in our security and intelligence agencies to help ensure they have the resources they need to deal with the threats we face. We will also continue to challenge ourselves as to what more we should do. The public inquiry into the Manchester Arena attack is currently taking evidence, and I know that this is a difficult and painful time for many people. The inquiry is rightly examining the events of that terrible night so that those who survived and those who lost loved ones can get the answers they need, and that we learn and apply the lessons, whatever they may be. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, at this time I would urge the public to remain vigilant. We should be alert but not alarmed, and any suspicious or concerning behaviour should be reported to the police. Those responsible for these attacks want to change our very way of life. Our clear message to them is that our values, our freedoms, our principles are what makes us strong, and they will never succeed. I commend the statement to the House.
Come again.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the right honourable gentleman for early and advanced sight of his statement. I know that the Home Secretary also spoke to the Leader of the Opposition this week, and I think it's important that the House and indeed the country know that there is unity of purpose between the Government and the Opposition on these matters. I want to start by extending our heartfelt sympathy to the victims of the recent attacks in France and Austria. And our hearts do go out to the family of Samuel Paty and to those who lost loved ones in Vienna and Nice, killed in the most horrific and senseless way. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am sure that many members of the House will join me in sending solidarity and support to our friends and allies, the citizens of France and Austria, who have experienced this assault on their values, their freedoms and their way of life. I have been clear from this dispatch box that we on these benches consider it our first responsibility to keep this country, its people and our community safe. We will be forceful, fair and robust in supporting the fight against terrorism and crime in all its forms, and we therefore wholeheartedly support the decision of the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre that the terror threat be raised from substantial to severe. And we share the Government's view that this decision should not cause undue alarm, but is a precautionary move, and it demonstrates the importance of us all remaining vigilant. It is a precautionary act, one demonstrating, however, the importance of remaining vigilant, building up our current capabilities and closely monitoring existing threats. And we are deeply grateful for the work of JTAC alongside, of course, our security services and our counter-terror policing, who continue to carry out vital work to keep us safe. I would, however, like to ask the Security Minister a few questions. Firstly, what is the Government's strategy for enacting and reinforcing these heightened measures? Can the Minister outline to the House how regularly JTAC reviews the terror threat level, or is it on an ad hoc basis? We welcome the proactive response from the Head of Counter-Terror Policing, Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu, whose work and whose team I pay a tribute to. He said the police had activated established planning mechanisms, increased levels of visible patrols, and implemented wider security and protection measures. So can the Minister inform the House what additional resources then have been made available to counter-terror police, the UK intelligence services, UK law enforcement and their operational partners to keep the public safe in line with heightened measures? Public communication will also be vital to the efficacy of these changes, and at a time when public health messaging has been uniquely bombarded and we are asking a lot of the public in terms of interpreting those and cooperating with them, how can the government ensure it is successfully promoting a strong, clear and consistent message on public safety in this regard, and what are the routes that are available to the public for reporting suspicious activity? Can the Minister confirm to the House the status of the independent review of the PREVENT strategy? We feel this is long overdue and it has a vital role to play as part of the holistic preventative approach to tackling terrorism. Will the Government be providing additional border and port checks in Great Britain as part of these measures? And does the Minister continue to be satisfied that a separate assessment for Northern Ireland continues? Mr Deputy Speaker, we have faced our own challenges in this country, as the ongoing inquiry into the Manchester Arena attack demonstrates only too well, and the citizens of France and Austria are enduring this pain now. We know we can never let terror or extremism, whether from Islamism or the far right, divide or undermine our core values or diminish our way of life. It must always be met with a robust and decisive response. Keeping the public safe is our assured priority. We support today's decision and urge the British people to remain vigilant and, as ever, steadfast.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his support and that of the opposition? And as he highlighted, I know that the Home Secretary did speak to the Leader of the Opposition, and indeed I also spoke to leaders within the devolved administrations as well, to ensure that there was good communication and coordination across the whole of the United Kingdom, recognising that this is a threat level that speaks to all of the UK. The honourable gentleman asks about the role of JTAC. What I can say to him is that JTAC keeps the threat level under constant review. So it is a question always about assessing the intelligence, the information that is available, but also the context, which is why, as I've indicated, that sort of international perspective is so important when analysing this as well. He talks about the public communication. I would just underline to him that the counter-terrorism policing network effectively sent a communication around the entirety of that network, so that, in other words, policing in all parts of the UK had consistent messaging, and there are established processes and procedures that apply to ensure that we step up in terms of that visibility in public places, thinking about how to provide support to areas that may have areas of vulnerability, thinking about crowded places, all of those sorts of themes. And therefore it is part and parcel of that standard approach that is reflected in the resources that we provide to our intelligence and also to our counter-terrorism policing. He asks about the PREVENT strategy. We are in the final stages of the recruitment of the independent reviewer, because I think there is a real opportunity here to examine those elements of our work, to see what further steps we do need to take. And as I've indicated in the House already this afternoon, we will continue to challenge ourselves on what additional measures may be appropriate. And in terms of Northern Ireland, we judge that a separate assessment is appropriate. It is a separate process that operates with the security service involved in that step, in terms of looking at the threat from, sadly, distant Republican terrorism in Northern Ireland. That threat very much endures. We remain vigilant and robust in meeting the challenges there, in coordination with the police service of Northern Ireland, as well as obviously other agencies too. But I thank him for his comments, and we stand united against those who would seek to divide us. And of course, national security remains the utmost priority for this government and the safety of our citizens.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
I welcome the fact that the government have chosen to make this statement. The attack plans of lone terrorists are obviously the hardest to anticipate, yet their behaviour often sends signals to those in their immediate circle. What advice does my right honourable friend have for people who see worrying signs that someone they know is developing an extremist outlook?
The right honourable gentleman makes a really important point about the nature of the threat that we face of self-motivated individuals, but they are not isolated, they are not alone, they sit within communities, within families, they have connections with different agencies. That's why we did introduce the prevent duty on statutory agencies. But I would say to my honourable friend that if people have concerns, they should report them in confidence to the police. The counter-terrorism hotline is 0800 789 321. There are obviously additional resources online at gov.uk, and also there's an app, the Action Counters Terrorism, the ACT app, that can also be downloaded, which provides further information and ways to report information.
Video link. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. This is a prudent move, and the United Kingdom Government has the full support of the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government in the fight to keep all our communities safe from terrorism. I'd like to take this opportunity to express condolences on behalf of my party to those bereaved or injured in the recent terrorist atrocities in Vienna and across France, and to express our solidarity for the people of Austria, with the people of Austria and France. I also pay tribute to those who risked their lives to keep us safe. The funeral of Sergeant Matt Ratana yesterday was a sad reminder of the high price that they pay for our safety. I salute his courage and his service and extend the sincerest condolences of my party to his family and friends. Can I ask the Minister to tell us what work is being carried out with local communities and faith groups to ensure a coordinated response as the threat level is increased, and what support and assistance is being offered to minority groups in need of additional reassurance? He'll be aware that in Scotland, the delivery of the Prevent strategy is devolved and has worked well to foster strong relations between communities and the police. Will he consider looking at the success of Scotland's approach and seeing what lessons can be learned for the rest of the United Kingdom? Finally, it is the remit of the Home Office to make sure that all our communities are kept safe and secure. In mid-September, counter-terrorist police warned the Home Secretary that it was suspected that a far-right extremist had attempted to carry out a terrorist attack at a solicitor's firm in London. Yet in early October, she and the Prime Minister went on to intensify their anti-lawyer rhetoric. Can I ask the Minister to acknowledge that there is a responsibility on politicians and other public figures to avoid saying anything that could inflame tensions or put people at risk?
Well, what I would say to the Right Honourable Lady is that I welcome the support that she gives to the steps that JTAC have taken, and I would underline to her the contact that I had shortly afterwards with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice to, again, underline that coordinated approach across the United Kingdom. She does highlight, rightly, those who put themselves and put their very lives on the line for us. And the funeral of Matt Ratana, as she highlights, I think underlines that so clearly. And the thoughts of the whole House to his friends, his loved ones and his colleagues, I know will be underlined here again today. The Right Honourable Lady highlights the issue of communities. And the counter-terrorism network clearly works across the UK to provide support and contact, both advice to faith communities and other places of vulnerability to ensure that appropriate measures can be put in place. I would highlight to the Right Honourable Lady the Places of Worship scheme that the Home Office established with the award of 183 grants in England and Wales, but also broader work that I know that we coordinate with the Scottish Government to ensure that we can work together, we can learn together, recognising, as Neil Basu highlighted, that it is communities standing together that defeats terrorism. In relation to her last point, I would just say to her very gently that this case is pre-trial and it would not be appropriate to provide any further comment that may impact on legal proceedings.
Dr. Liam Fox.